After I finished college, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. So thank goodness my father helped me, got a job. And so I basically went to work for a few years in the food business and realized that I loved eating food, consuming it, but not being in the food business. I actually learned to cook, and that's one of the things I've done all my life and enjoyed. But it just wasn't what I wanted to do. And after a few years, I got a job teaching, thanks to the fact that a former high school coach was now in the central administration, and I told him I'd give anything to try my hand at teaching. And so he gave me an opportunity to do that. It's like the first day I walked in the classroom, and I thought, this is it. This is what I want to do in life. As I said, I really enjoyed research. I enjoyed quantitative research. And so I not only basically mastered statistics in my PhD program, but actually I did my postdoctorate at the University of Michigan in advanced statistics. And I especially like doing survey research, but I also did some experimental work. So I was very much interested initially in the portrayal of minority groups in media. And that later led me in my filmmaking to look in how minorities had been treated, especially in the area of civil rights, because that's where I'd done some of my research on the portrayal of African Americans in American television. And so that led me later, when I was working on documentary films, to seek out minority figures who had been instrumental in the civil rights movement. Securing grants is just part of academic life, both for people who do traditional research and people who do creative works like I do. I began to find out which kinds of granting agencies were interested in documentary. Corporation for Public Broadcasting, with the Freedom Forum, Yavits Charitable Foundation. They were interested in a film that I was doing on a young Czech prodigy, Jewish boy who was killed in the Holocaust. And their funding basically made it possible for us to do that film. We also would fundraise. We'd go to New York and maybe to the home of a wealthy donor who would host a reception for us, and then basically just ask people to write checks. My colleague Sandra Dixon and I would do our little dog and pony show, and we would show a trailer, ask for questions and everything, and then at the end, people, if they wanted to contribute, would simply write checks. Photography, in fact, when I was a student, taking like a class in filmmaking or something, and we had to go and purchase maybe 3 50-foot rolls of film. That's all, maybe 10 minutes worth of film, and then have that developed. And what you didn't have much because it was expensive. You couldn't afford to shoot a whole lot. Not just the cost of doing that has come down, but it's come down for the general population, so that just as Kodak, if you remember what Kodak was, Kodak made still photography popular on a worldwide basis. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean suddenly we have a lot of good films? No, because people have to learn, the basics of filmmaking. They have to learn the basics of storytelling. That hasn't changed. It's still very important to understand the art of storytelling. In terms of the technology, it's available to everybody, and it's because of the digital revolution. Well, everybody, when you're looking for a story, sometimes we gravitate toward people who are in the news, who are very popular or whatever. And I've always found that sometimes it's the person who didn't get any recognition, and then you stumble upon the story and you see how rich it is and say, this person deserves his or her day in the limelight. For at least 3 films that I've done, that my colleagues and I have done, I would say we took somebody who was relatively unknown, especially like in the civil rights movement, but whose stories were fascinating. They were unsung heroes. and we made films about them, and it was very gratifying. I would cite two things. I remember one time I was in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we had been invited by the North Carolina Humanities Council to give a screening on a film we did called Negroes with Guns. There was a panel discussion that followed the screening. The auditorium was packed, or the theater, and afterwards they had a question and answer session. And this one man stood up and he had his son stand up beside him. His son must have been 10 years old, something like that. And this man said, "I knew who Rob Williams was." And he said, "I'm so glad this film was made, and I am so happy to have my son here tonight to see what a great man Rob Williams was." And I teared up, I thought, I know now why I do films like this. It's just that response really moved me. And then the other thing in terms of an accomplishment, I'd been here about 10 years, and we had tremendous success, both student success, faculty success with documentary. But the university, the country had a big recession, and it was gut-wrenching, and cuts had to be made. And the dean I had at the time was not the dean who brought me here, and he just decided that he couldn't afford this, the Documentary Institute, and so he basically put it on the chopping block. And I mean, that was a low point in my life. And then, lo and behold, within a few months, the Independent magazine came out with an article ranking the best documentary film programs in the country. It said, here are the top 10 best. And one of them was the University of Florida. So that was incredibly gratifying. There you were, ranked along with Duke, NYU, Stanford, the very best. So Berkeley was another one. So that was like the high point in my academic career. Get your priorities straight and think about your values and follow your heart, which basically means this. If you say, I'm going to make $100,000 a year by the time I'm 30, I feel sorry for you. If, on the other hand, you get a job that you love so much, you can't believe you're getting paid to do it, you have exceeded expectations. That's the greatest thing. Find something you enjoy doing that you have a passion for. That's, to me, the secret of happiness. Late in life, I discovered the People's Republic of China. I gave a lecture at the Beijing Film Academy, and when I was giving this lecture, the students afterwards said, "Oh, you've shown us these films you've done. You've been to Israel, you've filmed in Germany, you've filmed in Mexico, you filmed in Nicaragua and Cuba and all these places. Why don't you make a film in China?" Well, I thought about that, and I thought, well, it's a challenge, because I made 3 films in Cuba. And each time I wound up either getting kicked out of the country or having some problems with the Cuban government. And then we'd make up and they'd invite me back. But I thought, well, maybe if I could find a topic. But I had to choose carefully, because the Chinese government is incredibly sensitive. I found out that I had a lot of students from China. And they would say, when you come back to China, could you give a lecture at my university where I, graduated from in China? And so I started doing that. And then over a period of 12 years, I made 9 trips to China. The one I'm taking next month will be my 10th trip to China. I think I'm going to give only 1 lecture this time, but it'll be my 17th university to visit and to give a lecture. That's been incredibly rewarding. I always get together with former students. They're always glad to hear what's going on at the University of Florida, in the college. I started on a project just before the pandemic, and it interests me a great deal. It's about one of the few matrilineal societies still left in the world. It's hard to get to. It's an arduous trip that goes from here, Atlanta to the West Coast to Korea to Shanghai to Kunming, and then a drive or a flight finally to a place called Lake Lugu at the foothills of the Himalayas. That's where they live. So I started the project, along came the pandemic, and that wiped me out for 3 years. Couldn't get back in China. And it's opened up again. I'd say for a couple of years I'm going to be pretty occupied with this film on China.